areas. Good. Welcome. Give him a hand.
So, hello everybody, online and in person. I've already been introduced and mentioned also by Joan and Judith here previously. I've been working with for several years in the Cine project and other projects, and but I've been there as a director of the Gunnar Gunnarsson Institute since last century. So in 1999, I was hired there as a directing manager to build up a cultural center, which I think we have succeeded quite well in. But this is not a talk about that. It's talk about the hidden heritage in valleys and wilderness, because the cultural landscape is not always revealing all its secrets from the past. And in sparsely populated areas of the north, so high percentage of heritage remains have not been registered nor researched. In Iceland, for example, we estimate that only 30% of all tangible remains have been registered. So hundreds of thousands are out there in the landscape, and many of them might disappear in the coming decades due to climate change, or some mitigation actions that will also impact our cultural landscape. In my presentation, I will give you an overview of what we plan to do in our case study of DACCHE to meet these challenges, and for example, with digital solutions and citizen science. We are two main partners in Iceland participating in the project, the small Gunnar Gunnarsson Institute in the east of Iceland. Yeah, two staff whole year. It's a little bit like the same with Judith in Donegal County Museum. But this is established in the memory of the writer Gunnar Gunnarsson, who built this beautiful mansion in the Fljótsdalur Valley, and there you can also find the ruins of a 16th century monastery. The other partner is the newly established Center for Digital Humanities and Arts, which is placed within the University of Iceland, but is more like an umbrella for collaboration between universities, institutions, and museums. Then we have a good selection of associated partners which are relevant for the project. One of them is even in Greenland, and even though Brexit is a troublemaker in NPA projects now, we also hope to continue working with the University of St Andrews in Scotland that has been collaborating with us in previous projects and, for example, built the virtual reality of our medieval monastery and the citizen science app that we will develop further in DACCHE. And now we see. Okay. In Iceland, we base our case study in the Fljótsdalur area, which is in the eastern part. There you find an independent municipality with only 100 inhabitants, while the whole East Iceland is just the population of 11,000. The Fljótsdalur Valley is carved out of the highlands by the enormous power of Ice Age glaciers and was untouched by human activities until 1,200 years ago. At the time of the settlement, the climate was warming and the birch forest covered all hills and mountains up to 500 meters in altitude. The highlands were green and the glaciers smaller. But in the last 800 years, the landscape has changed dramatically, both due to human actions and natural catastrophes like colder climate and more volcanic activity. So drastic changes in the nature is nothing new for Icelanders nor other humans living in the Arctic area, but the speed of changes is what we fear. We have farmed our sheep for 1,200 years and herded them from the highlands in the autumn, a rich culture that is slowly disappearing with its traditions in many parts of Iceland. In Fljótsdalur Valley, many farmers have contracted parts of the land for reforestation, and the oldest planted woods are now 50 years and the timber is growing. Also, the tourism is growing, with attractions like Hengifoss waterfall and the Vatnajökull National Park, where Mount Snæfell is astonishing viewpoint just outside the glacier. There we have the Hengifoss waterfall, second or third highest waterfall in Iceland. And there we are standing on the top of the Mount Snæfell that you saw there in the background also of the valley. Here we are. So wherever we go, our history is written into the landscape. All the mountains have names, and everywhere we are surrounded by our heritage. By the place names that our ancestors used to map the land, and all the tales and stories related to the experience of each generation that herded the sheep in the wilderness and harvested the grass in the valleys. This is all at risk and might disappear and be forgotten, just like the old trails or routes that connected the Fljótsdalur Valley with a Hanseatic trading point in the fjords and a great fishing site by the southeast coast at the time of the medieval monastery at Skriðuklaustur. That was 500 years ago. Yeah. And if we scope briefly the impacts of climate change that we are already facing in East Iceland, we can hardly speak of snowy winters anymore. The downfall is mainly in the form of rain, leading to landslides, floods, and more humidity, both outdoor and indoor. We have faced long droughts, like in the summer 2021, when we didn't see a drop of rain for almost 3 months. So rivers and water wells dried up, and luckily there were no wildfires that summer. Storm intensity is washing away heritage remains on the banks of lakes and also by the coast. And even though rising sea level will not impact Iceland as much as many other countries, because the land will also rise when the glaciers melt, we can already see the coastal erosion with extreme storms washing away remains all around Iceland. And many of those sites are related to our medieval history that we don't know so much about. Warmer climate increases the speed of retreating glaciers, with new landscape appearing and rivers disappearing. The thawing permafrost in the highlands and mountains bring the risk of huge landslides that can end with disasters. Even the invasion of small insects has impacted on our heritage and nature. Do we speculate about these things in our surroundings? Do people living in huge cities in Europe have any idea of what is happening in our environment here in the north due to climate change? I don't know, but DACCHE is all about making people more aware of what is at stake and show that heritage organizations can be key players in our action to save the planet. All this expected impact on our cultural and natural heritage in the coming decades is frightening, but it also encourages us to do things that have been postponed or delayed for a long time, regarding, for example, gathering more information about our cultural landscape. To do that, we cannot rely only on scientists and experts. The time is too short. We all have to contribute to such an action, which is also important to make us more aware of what is at risk. So the first question that we want to seek answers to in our case study in Iceland in DACCHE is how we can use citizen science and educational tourism to map and monitor cultural landscapes and the impacts of climate change. And how will we do that? We need to know and pay attention to our cultural landscapes to be able to preserve it and evaluate how much worth it is for us and the coming generations. And we need to be able to inform our tourists about the area that they are visiting. They can even contribute in some ways by giving us their opinions on our mitigation actions and help us to monitor changes. To give you an example, I want to introduce you to piles of stones over here. Heritage remains that you find all over Iceland. Most of these cairns, as they are called in English, vörður in Icelandic, mark old trails, old routes, or borders between farms. Very few of these heritage remains that are protected by law have been geolocated and registered or recorded with digital tools. That will, for example, be one of the tasks in our case study in the small community of Fljótsdalur Valley, to gather pictures and locations of cairns from farmers in the valley, and even teach them to do a quick LiDAR scanning with their iPhone of these remarkable remains, which can be up to 1,000 years old. And by mapping all the cairns, we will see some new context in our cultural landscape, and probably we can relate some of it to previous climate change or human actions. So the scanning of the cairn there, it's done with an iPhone in 2 minutes. And it's accurate up to centimeters, so it gives you a pound cloud and everything. It's a lighter. The iPhone has a lighter scanning. We don't need to go so far back in time to witness big changes in our cultural landscape. To so-called little ice age in Iceland, the so-called little ice age in Iceland and the north was at its peak in the end of the 19th century, around 1890, resulting in Iceland, for example, in immigration to Canada and leaving the land eroded with little vegetation. By comparing aerial photographs from the last 80 years, we can see how much our landscape has changed. Man-made constructions like roads and ditches appear in the middle of the 20th century, and huge reforestation projects were started just 30 years ago. So there you have the same area and you can see the changes. By using 360 photospheres like this one of the same area, actually, we can allow people to discover their valley from a different angle. This kind of media, a 360 drone picture, is valuable in so many ways. It shows the cultural landscape at the time when it is taken. It can be used to get exact locations of place names from individuals that know their land by heart, but don't understand two-dimensional area photos. And it can help us to identify old routes and remains and many other things. We have already from previous projects like Cine and related projects, around 400 such photospheres of all the valley to use as material in workshops with local community this winter. And here you can see some of our test pilots in the commune. Are they having fun or not? I don't know. But it's incredible actually to put people maybe in their 80s, put the goggles on them and let them fly over the land that they have been walking on for decades. And in the case study, we will collect a lot of content through public engagement by using workshops, citizen science apps, and methods developed in the project. We hope to motivate and empower organizations and build the capacity of individuals and communities to facilitate digital solutions in their climate action. Nowadays, we all have a magic box in our pocket and palm that can be used for recording and monitoring in so many ways if you just get basic instructions on how to use it and where to deliver your material. The smartphone is a game changer for heritage preservation and promotion from my point of view. That brings us to the second question that we have in our case study in Iceland. How can we enhance VR and AR to show the impact of climate change or mitigation actions? We aim to do that through transmedia storytelling, where we put our content into new context by using, for example, game engines to recreate the past, present, and the predicted future of our cultural landscape. In relation with huge power projects like wind parks, the landscape is going to be scanned in the next few years in many places for research, planning, design, and construction. And that is some data that we can actually use. The Fljótsdalur area is amongst these places where power companies have already built huge hydropower stations and are now planning to build wind farms. So it is very likely that the engineering agencies will digitize both the valley and the wilderness in the next 3 years, maybe. And that digital material is of value for our project. Because when we have a digital reproduction of the landscape, we can work with that to make models that visualize changes. And by using VR and AR, such models can be presented even in the exact location for locals and tourists, which builds a ground for researching, for example, that what tourists think about wind turbines in the wilderness of Iceland or new forests covering the hills, and which can be vital and important information into planning. Leading to the third question to be answered in the case study in Iceland, And that is how these emerging technologies can be facilitated by small communities to have more transparent and comprehensive discussion about mitigation actions that we are facing in the next decades. And that will impact our cultural landscape as we know it today. That is fast growing challenge, I would say, in the Arctic area, because there's a global demand for production of green energy, and that is one of our action. Well, we have plenty of wind and water in the north, as we know. The first contract between landowners and the electric companies to build wind parks in the Fljótsdalur Valley have already been signed. It's something that not all the 100 inhabitants have the same opinion on. The Fljótsdalur area is extremely practical for energy production due to already built hydropower plant with a double high voltage line leading down to the East Fjords. And that power line can also be used for transporting more green energy from the highlands to a hydrogen factory in the fjords. So this is a matter for us to study. Parks of wind turbines that are up to 250 meters high are going to change our cultural landscape. And all the road and platform constructions around it will impact our heritage remains. I think that is just inevitable. And the hilltops around the valley are 600-700 meters high in altitude. And then this picture is just to put the size of the turbines into the context of our landscape. There are no plans to build a huge turbine exactly in this location there in the middle of the valley. And even though there's a very good wind there, but they will more be up in the hills and surrounding the valley or up in the wilderness. So another thing related to mitigation actions is CO2 binding and the pressure on reforestation. In Fljótsdalur Valley, you find the oldest woods in reforestation in Iceland, planted in the 70s. And many farmers in the valley have fenced off land for forestry in the last decades, resulting in changes in landscape. Here you can see on, well, if it was not so sunny here today, here you can see on this side, there's a natural birch forest that is really growing now in the warmer climate. So it's moving up towards the higher altitude. 30 years ago, we would say that 250 meters, no trees are going to grow above that. It's growing really fast above that now. And on the other side, it's a large, mainly a large tree forest planted in the 90s. And in this case study, we will also research the impact of reforestation on our cultural landscape because it is putting a different texture on the landscapes. We can even say that, okay, it's hiding some of our place names. But in the DACCHE case study in Iceland, we hope to achieve many things. One is to preserve heritage and cultural landscape in some form for the future generations. Another thing is to build the capacity of small communities and the awareness of climate changes. By collaborating nationally and transnationally, by reflecting our studies and methods in areas and communities that are different from the Fljótsdalur area, we will hopefully end up with a toolbox that facilitates citizen science in the climate action of tomorrow. A toolbox that can be shared with others and implemented in other communes and countries. It will be an exciting 3 years walk into the unknown to search for the hidden heritage of our wilderness and valleys. And hopefully we will be able to inspire many to follow us when we have marked the way. Thank you.